Hello and welcome to the Japanese Economic Review channel. Today we're digging into the brand new industrial production figures for December 2025, fresh from the Ministry of Economic, Trade, and Industry. So let's get right into it.
So the big question is Japan's manufacturing sector running hotter or is it starting to run out of steam? This latest data paints a really fascinating and honestly a kind of contradictory picture. It's a bit of a puzzle, so let's dive in and see if we can figure out what's really going on inside the country's factories.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the main numbers for December. Then, we'll get into this weird tension between capacity and how much factories are actually running. After that, we'll pinpoint the specific industries making waves. And finally, we'll wrap it all up and talk about what it all means for the big picture. Sound good? Let's go. All right, Section 1, the December 2025 headline figures. This is going to give us a quick snapshot of all the factory activity. Okay, so take a look at these numbers. Production is almost flat, down just a tiny 0.1%. But here's where it gets interesting. Shipments, that stuff actually going out the door, dropped by 1.6%. At the same time, inventory, the stuff sitting on shelves, went up almost a full percent. Now that disconnect is super important, because it pushes up something called the inventory ratio. And why does that inventory ratio matter so much? Well, that 1.6% jump is a pretty clear signal. It tells us that production is outpacing what the market actually wants right now. It's basically like, imagine a bathtub. If you've got the faucet running just a little bit faster than the water's going down the drain, what happens? The water level rises. That rising water, that's your inventory. So this whole inventory situation leads us straight into the real heart of this month's report, and that is this. Really interesting tension between the total potential of Japan's factories and how hard they're actually being run. And wow, this next slide just lays it all out perfectly. Check this out. On the left, you see manufacturing production capacity actually went down a little. But on the right, the operating rate, how much they're using that capacity, went up by 1.3%. So, wait a minute. How can the total potential be shrinking while the factories are working harder? That's the central puzzle right there.
So let's just make sure we're on the same page. When we talk about production capacity, what we really mean is the maximum possible output. Think of it as the total size of every factory in Japan all added together. And what this data is telling us is that the total size of that manufacturing footprint has gotten just a tiny bit smaller.
The operating rate, though, that's a different story. That's about how much of that available factory space you're actually using. It's like turning up the dial on the machines you've got. And right now, that dial is being turned up. Factories are running hotter, they're working more intensively. It's a classic case of trying to do more with less.
Okay, so who's actually responsible for these two trends pulling in opposite directions? Let's get into the specifics and look at the industry movers and shakers.
So on the side of shrinking capacity, we're seeing some good players pulling back. Electronic parts and devices are down 1.4%. Same for ceramics, stone, and clay products. And the chemical industry is also trimming down. These sectors are clearly consolidating, maybe closing older plants and shrinking their overall footprint.
But now for the twist. Who's boosting the operating rate? Well, we've got production machinery and general-purpose machinery cranking things up. But look at the top of the list. Electronic parts and devices again, with a huge 6% jump. So the same industry that's shrinking its overall capacity is also the one that's working its remaining factories the hardest. How about that?
And that really gets to the heart of the story here. The electronics sector is a perfect example of this strategic shift. They're shrinking their total capacity, right? But at the same time, they are absolutely cranking up the productivity of the facilities they have left. It's not about getting bigger. It's about getting smarter and more efficient.
All right, let's zoom out. We've looked at all the pieces, so what does this data actually mean? What's the big picture takeaway here? It really boils down to a three-step story. Step 1, the total manufacturing capacity is consolidating a little bit. It's getting slightly smaller. Step 2, the factories that are left are being used way more intensely, way more efficiently. And what does that lead to? Step 3, it suggests a really strategic shift. We're seeing a move towards smarter production, not just blind expansion. And that leaves us with a really big question looking forward. What does this mean for the future? With shrinking capacity but higher efficiency, is Japan's industry getting ready for a new era of smarter growth? Or is this a sign of long-term constraints that could eventually put a ceiling on how much they can produce? The answer to that question is probably going to define the next chapter for Japanese manufacturing.
So there you have it, the story from the December 2025 Indices of Industrial Production, a really fascinating look at a sector in transition focusing on efficiency over expansion. Thank you for watching the Japanese Economic Review. We look forward to having you with us again.